Claire Bennett had not even had time to understand why her credit card had been declined when her phone informed her that she had just been locked out of the very house that carried both her name and her husband's. Less than a minute later, her father called and said the sentence that shattered the entire world Claire had believed in for 14 years, right in the middle of her son's birthday song. "Do not go home, Claire. Daniel filed for divorce." The small restaurant along the Charleston riverfront still glowed beneath warm golden lights. Glasses clinked softly against one another. Piano music drifted through the laughter of families having dinner. At the table by the window, 10 candles were still burning on Noah's chocolate cake, their tiny flames trembling each time the boy leaned closer to look at them. Noah had just turned 10. He was smiling. Claire could no longer hear anything except her father's voice through the phone. Edward Cole spoke very slowly, as though he knew that one word placed incorrectly could send his daughter into panic. "The 2 joint accounts have been almost completely emptied. Your cards could stop working at any moment. And this afternoon, a transaction worth $2.8 million was authorized using your signature." Claire tightened her grip on the phone. "Impossible." That was the first thought that entered her mind. Not Daniel. Not the man who kissed her forehead every morning before leaving for work. Not the man who had spent an entire night outside the emergency room when Noah had pneumonia. Not the man who had once told her that everything he was building was for this family. Edward went silent for a few seconds. He knew Claire was doing what she had done for years, searching for an explanation that felt kinder than the truth. "Claire, listen to me. Do not call Daniel. Do not sign anything. Get Noah out of there." Claire looked at her son. Noah was dragging one finger through the white frosting along the edge of the cake, then sneaking it into his mouth. He looked at his mother and smiled as though this were the biggest secret of the night. Daniel still had not arrived. An hour earlier, he had texted that a meeting with investors was running longer than expected. He would try to make it before Noah blew out the candles. Claire had believed him. She always believed him. Her phone vibrated again. A notification from the bank. Transaction declined. Immediately after that, the smart home app displayed a cold line of text. "Access revoked." Claire stared at the screen until the words seemed to blur. What she did not know was that nearly 10 kilometers away, Daniel Bennett was sitting in the private conference room of a law firm, his jacket hanging over the back of a chair, his tie loosened. In front of him sat a thick file and a glass of water he had barely touched. Daniel was not panicking. He was waiting. Beside him, Vanessa Sloan closed her laptop. Everything was finished. Daniel checked the time. Claire must have received the notifications by now. Vanessa studied him. She had worked with Daniel long enough to know the difference between calm and emotional detachment. "Do you want to call her?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Not yet." He wanted Claire to have time to understand that the balance of power had changed. That was his first mistake. Because Daniel still believed Claire was the woman who had walked away from her career nearly 9 years earlier to become the wife standing behind him. He had forgotten who she had been before she became Mrs. Bennett. At the restaurant, Claire stood up. She did not cry. That worried Edward more than tears would have. Because he knew his daughter. When Claire was hurt, she went quiet. When Claire was afraid, she started observing. She crouched down beside Noah. "Sweetheart, we have to go." Noah looked at the candles. "But Dad is not here yet." Claire felt something sharp cut across her chest. She smiled anyway. "Dad is busy. We will take the cake with us." Noah watched her longer than usual. Children do not always understand what adults are hiding, but they know exactly when their mother's voice no longer sounds the way it normally does. He did not ask another question. Claire paid with another card. That one still worked. In the parking lot, just after Noah fastened his seatbelt, her phone rang. "Daniel." Claire stared at the name on the screen. 14 years of marriage contained inside 6 letters. She answered. Daniel spoke as if they were discussing a small change in their weekend plans. "Claire, I assume you received the paperwork." She did not answer immediately. Noah sat in the back seat with the birthday cake box resting on his lap. "You filed for divorce on your son's birthday?" Daniel exhaled. "Do not turn this into a scene. Some sentences do not need to be shouted to destroy a marriage." Claire heard herself ask the question. "Where is the money?" The silence on the other end lasted only a single beat. But to someone who had spent years analyzing financial fraud, one beat of silence could contain more information than a confession. Daniel avoided the question. "The lawyers will explain everything tomorrow morning." Claire looked through the windshield. There was no snow in Charleston. Only cold rain coated the streets in a thin sheen, stretching the reflected lights into long, distorted streaks. She asked again, "Did you lock me out of the house?" Daniel went silent once more. "I just want this to stay civilized." Claire laughed. A small, dry laugh with almost no emotion in it. Civilized. Daniel heard that laugh and for the first time that night felt uneasy. He was accustomed to a softer Claire. A Claire who chose peace over confrontation. A Claire who had allowed him to handle the money, the company, the lawyers, the taxes, and the investments for years. What he did not understand was that her gentleness had never meant weakness. Claire ended the call. Instinctively, she drove toward the house. But when she was still 2 blocks away, she slowed down. A black SUV was parked outside the gate. 2 men in business coats were carrying boxes of files from the garage to the vehicle. Daniel's Mercedes was gone. The light in his study was still on. Claire did not drive any closer. Edward had been right. Someone was clearing things out. She turned the car around. Noah looked up. "Are we not going home, Mom?" "Not tonight." "Why?" Claire looked at him through the rearview mirror. She wanted to give him a beautiful lie. She had lived inside beautiful lies for too long already. "I do not know how to explain it yet, but I will not lie to you." Noah went quiet, then nodded. Claire drove toward Edisto Island. On the way, she logged into the savings account. The balance made her blood run cold. Almost empty. She no longer had access to the investment account. A business account that had once been linked to her name now displayed a message saying the user did not exist. Daniel had not decided to divorce her today. He had been preparing for this day for a very long time. What Claire did not yet know was that he had been preparing for far longer than she imagined. Nearly an hour later, after Noah had fallen asleep against the window, Claire opened the glove compartment to look for a tissue. A brown envelope slipped onto the floor. Her name was written across the front in Edward's handwriting. Claire pulled over beneath the light of a closed gas station. Inside the envelope was a small key, the address of a storage facility in Savannah, and a sheet of paper folded in half. Only a few lines were written on it. Blue Harbor Holdings. Do not trust the numbers Daniel shows you. You are not as poor as he wants you to believe. Claire read the final line again. Then once more. Something very old began to wake inside her. It was not fear. It was not grief. It was the professional instinct she had once believed she left behind years ago. Daniel Bennett had spent nearly a decade making everyone believe that his wife was simply a woman living off his success. But before Daniel built his first company, Claire had been the woman people hired to find the money powerful people wanted hidden. And that night, the man who had underestimated her had just left behind his first trail. Claire folded the paper. She looked at Noah sleeping, then at the dark road ahead. Her marriage might have just ended, but Claire Bennett had not. And Daniel was about to remember exactly who the woman he married really was. But before Claire would make him remember, she had to face a truth far more frightening. Maybe Daniel had never forgotten how good she was. Maybe that was exactly why he had prepared everything so carefully. Edward's cottage sat near the end of a narrow road on Edisto Island, hidden behind old oak trees and curtains of Spanish moss hanging gray in the night. Claire arrived well after midnight. The cold rain from Charleston followed her all the way to the front steps. Noah was still asleep. Claire turned off the engine but did not get out right away. She sat in the darkness with both hands resting on the steering wheel, her father's envelope on the passenger seat. Blue Harbor Holdings. 4 words. A name she had never heard before. And yet her father had written it as though it could explain everything. Claire looked at Noah through the rearview mirror. His head had fallen to one side, his birthday shirt wrinkled beneath the seatbelt. The cake box sat beside him, 10 candles that had never been blown out. Her chest tightened. Daniel might have betrayed her. But Noah was still his son. And somewhere in the city behind them, Daniel knew perfectly well that today was his son's birthday. He had chosen today anyway. Claire opened the car door. She carried Noah inside and laid him on the small bed in the room that had once been hers when she was younger. He stirred slightly as she pulled the blanket over him. "Did Dad call, Mom?" Claire froze. "No." Noah closed his eyes. "He is probably busy." The 3 words were so light they seemed to carry almost no weight. But Claire had to turn away. She did not want her son to learn what she had taught herself to do for years. Always find a kind explanation for the person who disappoints you. Claire closed the bedroom door. Then she returned to the living room and placed the key Edward had left on the table. Beneath the address of the storage facility in Savannah was a handwritten sequence of numbers. Not a code. A storage box number. Claire recognized it immediately. Years ago, Edward had taught her that if you wanted to understand a suspicious transaction, you should never begin by asking where the money went. Ask why someone wanted it to travel that way. The next morning, Claire left Noah with Edward's longtime neighbor, an older woman named Margaret Hale. She only said that the family was dealing with something urgent. Margaret did not ask questions. By late morning, Claire arrived at a private storage facility on the outskirts of Savannah. The key opened box number 317. There was no cash inside. No jewelry. Nothing an ordinary person would immediately call an asset. Only paper. 3 boxes of files. An encrypted storage device. And a bundle of documents tied together with blue cord. Claire saw the first logo. Blue Harbor Holdings, LLC. She pulled a chair closer. The first page was a business registration document. The name listed as managing member made her stop breathing. Claire Bennett. She read it again. Once. Twice. 3 times. There was no mistake. Her full name. Her date of birth. Her former address. Even part of her tax identification information. Claire turned to the next page. A signature. It looked like hers. Very much like hers. But it was not. Daniel had made the kind of mistake only someone who knew Claire extremely well could make. He had copied the shape of her signature. But he had not copied the habit behind it. Claire always pulled the final stroke of Bennett slightly upward. The signature on the document curved down. She stared at it for a long time. Then the abandoned wife disappeared from Claire's face. In her place was the forensic accountant who had once kept chief financial officers awake at night. She began sorting. Blue Harbor owned an interest in a vacation property near Hilton Head. A subsidiary controlled 2 luxury apartments in Savannah. Another trust held coastal land behind one of Daniel's resort developments. There were escrow accounts, private investments, internal loans between companies that existed only on paper. Claire reached for a calculator. She added, then added again. The preliminary value exceeded $7.4 million. Claire sat completely still. The night before, Daniel had made her believe she was almost penniless. This morning, she discovered millions of dollars sitting inside a network of companies for which, on paper, she was the person responsible. But that was not the most frightening part. Claire pulled out another file. The transactions stretched across years. Some carried her electronic signature. Some listed her name under approvals. Some stated that Claire Bennett had reviewed and confirmed the financial structure. She had never seen any of them. Claire's heart began beating faster. This was not simply hidden assets in a divorce. Daniel had not only hidden money from his wife, he had placed her fingerprints all over his money. If those transactions were ever investigated, the first name on the paperwork might not be Daniel's. It could be Claire's. She looked down at her hands. 9 years earlier, Daniel had told her she did not need to keep working. He said he earned enough. He said no one needed her. He said the family needed someone who was not living inside spreadsheets and investigations. Claire had believed that was love. Now a colder question appeared. Had Daniel wanted her to leave her career because he loved her? Or because a Claire who no longer worked in forensic accounting would be less likely to examine the finances inside her own home? She kept reading. A stack of hotel receipts sat at the bottom of the box. Atlanta, Miami, Nashville, Washington. Dates when Daniel had said he was meeting investors. One name appeared beside his again and again. Vanessa Sloan. Claire did not draw a conclusion. Not yet. A good investigator does not turn suspicion into fact simply because the suspicion hurts. But she remembered the company dinners. The way Vanessa always seemed to know Daniel's schedule before Claire did. The way Daniel had always said Vanessa was only his lawyer. Someone Claire had no reason to worry about. Claire's phone vibrated. A message from Edward. Do not go back to Charleston. Claire called immediately. No answer. A second message arrived almost at once. Jonah knows the rest. Claire stared at the screen. Jonah Reed. The name pulled her back nearly 10 years, to an office filled with files where she had once worked beside the only man who had always told Claire that she could see the things other people deliberately overlooked. She called her father again. The call went straight to voicemail. Claire stood so quickly that the chair scraped hard across the floor. Another feeling began to rise inside her. No longer suspicion. Warning. She called a third time. Still no Edward. At that same moment, more than 100 kilometers away from Savannah, Daniel Bennett stood beside the window of his office overlooking Charleston. Vanessa placed her phone on the table. Edward Cole had disappeared from the place they expected him to be. Daniel turned around. Did he give the files to Claire? Vanessa did not know. And for the first time in years of working with Daniel, she saw something very small change in his expression. Not fear. Not yet. Just the irritation of a man who had suddenly discovered that one of the pieces on his board had moved on its own. Daniel asked where Claire was. Vanessa shook her head. No one knew. Daniel turned back toward the window. He still believed he had time. He still believed Claire was panicking. He still believed that a woman who had just lost her home, her money, and her marriage would only be trying to hold on to whatever remained. He had no idea that Claire was sitting between 3 boxes of documents containing the very secrets he had spent years burying. And he had even less idea that what frightened her most now was not $7.4 million. Not Vanessa. Not the divorce. It was her father. Claire looked at Edward's final message. Jonah knows the rest. She tightened her grip on the phone. Then she called the man she had not spoken to in nearly a decade. Jonah answered on the first ring. He did not say hello. He only said one sentence. Claire, your father was right about Daniel from the beginning. Jonah Reed's voice came through the phone, low and steady, without a second of hesitation. And it was that certainty that made Claire feel colder than anything she had just read in the 3 boxes of files sitting in front of her. She stood in the middle of the storage room in Savannah, one hand holding the phone, the other still resting on the stack of documents bearing the name Blue Harbor Holdings. Where is my father? On the other end of the line, Jonah went silent. Claire hated that silence immediately. Jonah. I do not know yet. 4 words. Nothing more. But Claire could hear what Jonah was not saying. He was worried. Jonah Reed was not the kind of man who panicked easily. Nearly 10 years earlier, when they had worked together on the forensic audit team, Jonah had once spent 3 straight nights buried in thousands of transactions to uncover money hidden beneath 7 layers of intermediary companies. He was slow, patient, and so relentless with details that it could almost feel ruthless. If Jonah said he did not know, it meant he had already looked. And found nothing. Claire drew in a breath. Tell me everything. Jonah told her to leave the storage facility first. Not because anyone had threatened her. No one knew for certain that anyone would. But if Edward had been right, then the documents Claire had just found could make anyone trying to control the story very interested in knowing exactly what she now had in her hands. 20 minutes later, Claire sat inside a small coffee shop near the highway. She chose the last table against the wall, a position that gave her a clear view of both the front entrance and the parking lot. An old habit. She had forgotten she used to do that. Jonah started a video call. His face appeared on the screen. He had changed. His hair was shorter, the fine lines around his eyes were deeper, but his gaze was exactly the same, focused as though every word Claire spoke was being weighed on some invisible scale. Edward contacted me almost 3 weeks ago, Jonah said. Claire froze. 3 weeks? He never told me anything. He did not want you to know until he was certain. Certain about what? Jonah pulled a file closer to the camera. That Daniel was preparing for a divorce unlike any normal divorce. Claire said nothing. Jonah continued. Edward became suspicious after Daniel asked him to recommend someone who specialized in international asset structures. Daniel said it was for a new project, but Edward recognized several company names in some documents Daniel had left on a table. Blue Harbor? Not just Blue Harbor. Jonah turned the screen. A diagram appeared. 11 companies. Some in South Carolina. Some in Georgia. Some were nothing more than legal entities created to hold assets. Claire studied the lines connecting them. She recognized the structure immediately. The money did not move in a straight line. It was divided, redirected, reclassified, then surfaced somewhere else in a cleaner form. Daniel had not built this maze to hide a single account. He was building an entire parallel financial world. Jonah explained that Edward had asked him to investigate quietly. The deeper they looked, the more they found. Assets had been moved out of companies Claire knew into entities she had never heard of. Some transactions used her electronic signature. Some documents had been created on dates when Claire had clear proof she was somewhere else. Claire lowered her eyes. A memory surfaced. 3 years earlier, Daniel had brought a stack of papers to the dining table while Claire was helping Noah with homework. He placed a pen in her hand. Just an internal confirmation form. She had signed without reading every page, not because she was stupid, because she trusted her husband. And now that hurt more than anything else. Claire spoke very quietly. He used me as a shield. Jonah did not answer right away. Not exactly. Claire looked up. What do you mean? Daniel did not just need a name on the paperwork. He needed a name that, if anyone checked, would make them believe the structure had been designed by someone who understood finance. Claire felt her jaw tighten. Her name had not simply protected Daniel. It had made everything look credible. A forensic accountant with a strong reputation. A woman who had left the profession. A wife everyone would assume still understood her husband's finances. Daniel had not turned her into an outsider. He had turned her into living proof that there was nothing suspicious to see. Heat rose behind Claire's breastbone. Not tears. Anger. Claire had spent nearly 9 years believing she had given up her career for her family. Now she was beginning to understand just how much Daniel had benefited from that decision. Jonah looked at her. There is something else. Claire knew immediately that this was the part he had not wanted to tell her. He shared a video. Security footage from a parking garage. Edward appeared first. He was wearing the brown coat Claire had bought him the previous Christmas. He stood beside his car speaking with Daniel. There was no audio, but the body language was clear enough. Edward pointed toward a file. Daniel kept both hands in his coat pockets. Calm.
Too calm.
Then Vanessa Sloan stepped into the frame. Claire watched Edward turn toward her. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Then a gray sedan pulled up. Edward got inside. Claire leaned closer to the screen. Who did he leave with? We cannot see the driver's face. What happened after that? Her father's car was found the following morning at a marina south of Charleston. His wallet was still inside. His phone was gone. There was no visible sign that anything serious had happened there. But Edward never came home. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. She wanted to stand up. Drive straight back to Charleston. Walk into Daniel's office and force him to answer. Jonah saw it on her face. Do not. Claire opened her eyes. Do not tell me what to do when my father is missing. Edward knew you would react like this. Jonah held up a message on the screen. It had been sent to him the night before. If Claire finds out I am missing, she will go straight to wherever Daniel wants her to go. Do not let her. Get her back to her son first, then show her everything. Claire read the message twice. That was her father's voice. Stubborn. Controlling. Loving in a way that sometimes drove her insane. And this time it made her eyes burn. He knows me too well. Jonah gave the faintest smile. He always said you were the smartest person he had ever known, and also the person most likely to do something reckless when someone touched your family. A brief laugh escaped Claire, then disappeared. Her phone vibrated. Noah was calling. Claire answered immediately. Mom, is Grandpa with you? The question stopped her cold. No, sweetheart. He went quiet. Dad still has not called either. Claire closed her eyes. She could hear the disappointment in her son's voice. No drama. No tears. Just a child beginning to understand that adults do not always show up when they say they will. I will be home soon. Mom has something she needs to take care of. Noah asked very softly. Are you and Dad getting divorced? Claire did not know where he had heard it. Maybe from the way the adults around him were talking. Maybe from fragments of information Claire had thought she had hidden. She did not lie. Maybe. Noah was quiet for a few more seconds. Is it because of me? Claire felt her heart tighten. No. This time her voice was stronger. Absolutely not. Nothing your father or I choose to do is your fault. Do you understand? Noah said he did. Claire was not sure he truly did. But she would tell him as many times as necessary until he believed it. When the call ended, Claire looked at Jonah. I want to know where my father is. We will find him. And I want to know what Daniel has done. Jonah nodded. Then you need to see what Edward left with me. He opened another file. A list of transactions appeared. Beside each one were the date, the account, the legal entity, and the approval signature. Claire looked at the final line. A major asset transfer. The approving party was Claire, but the date was the same day she had been in the hospital with Noah after a minor procedure. Daniel had been there with her. He had sat beside their son's bed. He had brought Claire coffee. And on that very same day, a transaction carrying her name had been executed somewhere else. Claire stared at the screen for a long time. Then she spoke. He was not just preparing for a divorce. Jonah said nothing. Claire continued. He was preparing a version of me to blame if everything fell apart. In Charleston, Daniel was listening as Vanessa reported that Claire had called Jonah Reed. For the first time, his hand stopped in midair. Jonah? The name stripped the calm from Daniel's face for exactly one beat. Vanessa noticed. Is there a problem? Daniel looked out the window. Yes, because he remembered who Jonah was. And he remembered who Claire had been when the two of them worked together. Daniel had spent nearly a decade making Claire believe that part of her life was over. Now he was beginning to understand something. Maybe the woman he had underestimated had never disappeared. Maybe she had only fallen asleep. And Jonah Reed had just woken her up, and the first thing Claire did after waking up was not get angry. She started checking. By late afternoon, Jonah arrived in Savannah carrying an old leather bag, 2 cups of coffee, and the exhausted look of a man who had not slept enough in several days. He did not hug Claire. He did not ask whether she was okay. They both understood that would have been a meaningless question. He simply set the bag on the table. Edward left another address. Claire looked at him. Where? A private records office near the old commercial district on the east side of Savannah. Edward rented it under a company name almost 6 months ago. 6 months. Claire repeated the number in her mind. Her father had been suspicious of Daniel for half a year, while she was still choosing curtains for the living room with her husband. Still reminding him about Noah's soccer game. Still lying beside him every night and telling herself the distance between them was only the result of work. An hour later, Claire and Jonah stepped into the small room Edward had rented. There was nothing secretive or dramatic about it. Just a desk, a metal filing cabinet, and several cardboard boxes labeled in Edward's neat handwriting. The ordinariness of it made Claire uneasy. Her father was not a man who acted on impulse. If he had spent 6 months preserving these documents, then he must have believed that one day they would matter. Jonah opened the first box. Assets. The second. Divorce. The third. Noah. Claire stared at the final label longer than any of the others. A cold sensation ran down her spine. She pulled out the chair, opened the box. Inside were copies of correspondence between Daniel's office and Vanessa Sloane's legal team. Not divorce papers. Not asset division. Strategy. Each point was written in the cold language of people who had learned to turn human lives into problems that needed to be managed. Claire Bennett has been out of the workforce for nearly 9 years. She is primarily dependent on her husband's income. She does not directly manage the family's major investments. It may be argued that she lacks sufficient understanding of recent financial decisions. Claire stopped. Jonah stood behind her and said nothing. She kept reading. Another page referred to transactions made in Claire's name. If necessary, they could be used to raise questions about her financial judgment. Claire felt her fingertips go cold. Now she understood. Daniel was not only preparing to keep the money. He was preparing a story. In that story, Daniel was the hard-working husband who had tried to protect the family's assets. Claire was the wife who had been away from the profession too long, no longer understood what she was signing, and may have made questionable financial decisions before denying responsibility once the marriage fell apart. A version of Claire close enough to the truth for outsiders to believe, and wrong enough to destroy her. Jonah spoke quietly. There is one more section. Claire turned to the next file. Noah's name appeared on the first page. She immediately sat straighter. A proposed custody arrangement. Daniel wanted primary decision-making authority over Noah's education and place of residence. The anticipated reasoning. Claire's financial instability. The possibility that Claire was connected to transactions currently under review. The risk of Noah's living environment changing suddenly after the divorce. Claire did not keep reading right away. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Money could be recovered. A reputation could be rebuilt. But Daniel had put Noah into his strategy. The child who had waited for him to arrive and blow out birthday candles was now a line item in a negotiation plan. Jonah saw the change in Claire's face. It was small, but he had worked with her long enough to understand it. The hurt was becoming resolve. Claire closed the file. He wants to use those transactions in my name to argue that I am not stable enough to take care of Noah. It looks that way. No. Claire looked up. It does not look that way. That is exactly what he is planning to do. In Charleston, Daniel sat across from Vanessa in a private conference room. Vanessa read an email, then placed her phone on the table. Claire is in Savannah. Daniel frowned. With Jonah? Most likely. Daniel turned towards the window. He did not like that. Vanessa noticed immediately. Not because Jonah was dangerous. Because Jonah remembered Claire before Daniel. He knew how good she had been before her life had narrowed itself around family. Vanessa spoke. Maybe you should make the settlement offer early. Daniel turned back. Not yet. If I make it too early, she will think she has leverage. Vanessa looked at him. Maybe she does. Daniel did not answer. Back in the records office in Savannah, Claire opened the final box. There were more receipts. Trips Daniel had described as meetings with investors. Atlanta, Miami, Washington. Vanessa's name appeared beside his again and again. Claire kept her face calm. Until Jonah handed her a printed email. He said nothing. Claire read it. A message Vanessa had sent Daniel 3 months earlier. After the divorce is finalized, we will not have to keep pretending anymore. 1 sentence. No intimate details. None were needed. 14 years of marriage do not always collapse with an explosion. Sometimes all it takes is a single line. Claire's throat went dry. She remembered Vanessa sitting in her kitchen drinking wine at Christmas, giving Noah a chess set, holding Claire after her mother's funeral. Claire placed the email down very slowly. How long? Jonah did not know. Claire looked at him. You know more than that. Jonah exhaled. Edward believed the relationship started before the divorce plan did. Claire turned toward the window. The late afternoon sun covered the rooftops of Savannah in a soft, golden light that felt almost offensive. The world was still beautiful. That was the cruelest part. When someone's life falls apart, nothing outside is required to fall apart with it. A car still moved down the street. Someone still laughed at the cafe across the road. A child still tugged at his mother's hand asking for ice cream. Claire allowed herself exactly a few seconds to hurt. Then she turned back. What did my father find that made him disappear? Jonah opened Edward's laptop. Inside the final folder was an audio file. It had been recorded a few days earlier. Jonah played it. Daniel's voice filled the room. Not loud. Not angry. That calmness was exactly what made Claire feel cold. Keep him at Harbor 9 until Claire signs. There is no reason to complicate this. Just make sure he does not interfere again. Claire shot to her feet. The chair slid backward. What is Harbor 9? Jonah opened another document. A waterfront property owned by one of the companies connected to Blue Harbor. On paper, it is used as a guest property for investors. Claire looked at the map. Is Edward there? I cannot be certain yet. But he marked this location 3 times. Claire picked up her phone. Jonah stepped in front of the table. What are you going to do? Go get my father. No. Claire looked at him. You do not have the right to stop me. I am not stopping you. I am reminding you that Edward spent 6 months preparing all of this because he knew Daniel wanted you to react before you thought. Claire said nothing. In her mind were Noah, her father, the forged signatures, Vanessa, a husband who had turned love, money, and even her right to be a mother into pieces on the same board. Then Claire slowly lowered her phone. Jonah watched her. She was calmer than he expected. That made him both relieved and uneasy. Claire pulled the Harbor 9 map toward herself. I am not going to rush in there. She spoke carefully. I am going to understand it first. She looked at the lines connecting the companies Daniel believed only he could understand. Claire's eyes had changed completely. Daniel had spent years preparing to deal with a panicked wife in the middle of a divorce. But the woman sitting in front of the map now was no longer just his wife. She was the forensic accountant people once paid to find the things others wanted buried. And for the first time since Noah's birthday night, Claire was no longer asking what Daniel had taken from her. She was beginning to ask a more dangerous question. What had he left behind for her to find? That question followed Claire all the way back to Edisto Island, quiet but sharp, like a thread pulling her through the fog of betrayal. Daniel had spent years building a financial maze complicated enough to discourage any outsider from trying to understand it. But Claire was not an outsider. She had once made a living finding her way out of mazes exactly like this. And for the first time since her marriage collapsed, Claire understood that what Daniel feared most might not be that she would learn the truth. It might be that she would remember how to find it. By the time Claire and Jonah returned to the cottage, it was dark. Light from the living room spilled through the curtains, forming a small golden square among the black silhouettes of the oak trees. Margaret had already brought Noah back. He sat on the floor with his back against the sofa, a book open across his knees, though his eyes barely moved from the same page. The moment Claire walked in, Noah looked up. "Did you find Grandpa?" The question went straight into her chest. "Not yet." Claire took off her coat and sat down beside him. "But I found out about another place that may be connected to him." Noah studied her for a long time. He had changed in only a few days, not in a way that was easy to see. He was still the same 10-year-old boy who loved chocolate and hated onions, but there was something new in his eyes, the caution of a child trying to understand why the adults he trusted had suddenly turned into questions. Noah looked down. "Is Dad a bad person?" Behind them, Jonah was placing documents on the table. His hands stopped. Claire went silent too. She could say yes. It would be simple. She could say no. It would be easier. But Claire was beginning to understand that comforting lies were exactly what had kept her inside this marriage for so long. She rested a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Your dad has done some very wrong things." Noah looked at her. "But you are not responsible for the choices adults make, ever." He bit his lip. "If Dad does not want to be with you anymore, does that mean he does not want to be with me either?" Claire felt her throat tighten. "No," she answered immediately. "What happens between your dad and me does not decide your worth. You are still you. You are still loved, and I will not let any disagreement between adults make you believe otherwise." Noah gave the smallest nod. Claire hugged him. This time he did not ask another question. After Noah went upstairs, Claire returned to the dining table. Jonah had arranged the Harbor 9 files, the Blue Harbor documents, and the records from the related companies into separate groups. She pulled out a chair and sat down. "I do not want to rush straight into Harbor 9. Jonah looked at her. "Good. I want to know what Daniel thinks I am going to do." Jonah leaned back in his chair. "Now you are finally asking the right question." Claire looked at the financial diagram. Daniel had always liked predicting how other people would react. In their marriage, he used it to end arguments before they even began. In business, he used it to apply pressure without ever raising his voice. And now he was betting that Claire would behave like a desperate wife. She pointed to the Harbor 9 file. "If I call the police right now, Daniel will know I found this place. If I go there in a panic, he will have time to control everything before I even understand what I am looking at." Jonah nodded. "So what do you want?" Claire did not answer immediately. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, wind from the ocean moved through the oak branches. She remembered another office almost 10 years earlier, computer screens glowing through the night, spreadsheets that seemed endless, a younger Claire, more exhausted, but never once uncertain about what she was capable of. Then she remembered an evening many years ago. Daniel was opening his second company. His accounting system had failed, and Claire had helped design a backup record system so that no important change could simply disappear because someone deleted it from the main screen. She turned around. "Audit mirror." Jonah frowned. "What?" "Years ago, I helped Daniel's company set up an independent audit record system. It was not designed to monitor anyone. It was only meant to make sure that important financial changes always left a history that could be compared later." Jonah sat straighter. "Does he still use it?" "I do not know." Claire looked at the documents. "But Daniel hates changing anything that still works." She remembered how many times he had refused software upgrades because he insisted the existing system was good enough. How often he had laughed when Claire warned him that old technology eventually became a weakness. Back then, she had thought it was simply stubbornness. Now it might be an opportunity. Jonah opened his laptop. If that backup still exists, it might show us which transactions were changed or removed from the official reports. Claire nodded. But they did not discuss ways to break into or bypass any system. Claire did not need to do that. The documents they had already found showed that she was still listed as someone with a legal interest in certain financial structures Daniel had placed under her name. What she needed first was an independent lawyer. Not one of Daniel's people. Not one of Vanessa's. Someone whose duty was to protect Claire and Noah. Jonah called an attorney Edward had trusted. Claire made one simple request. If she found legally obtained documents connected to her name, she wanted them backed up immediately somewhere Daniel could not control. not carried in a bag, not stored on a single device, not placing the entire truth inside something that could disappear. Jonah looked at her after the call ended. "You have changed." Claire shook her head. "No." She looked at the files in front of her. "I am just remembering who I used to be." In Charleston, Daniel was beginning to feel it too. He stood in his office staring at a new report on the screen. Claire had not come home. She had not called to beg. She had not responded to the offer from the lawyers. She had not sent a single angry message Daniel could use to prove that she was losing control. Her silence unsettled him more than confrontation would have. Vanessa walked in. "You should send the settlement." Daniel did not look at her. "How much?" Enough to make Claire think walking away is the best option. Daniel gave the faintest smile. "She will take it." Vanessa was not so sure. Daniel turned around. "She has not worked in almost 9 years. She does not have a company. She does not have meaningful income. She does not have access to most of the assets. Claire needs stability." Vanessa studied him. "You are still talking about her as if the Claire of today is the same Claire from a month ago." Daniel did not answer. Back in Edisto, Claire was writing 3 goals on a sheet of paper. Find Edward. Protect Noah. Preserve the evidence. She set the pen down. No revenge. No destroying Daniel simply to make him hurt. Claire did not want to become a mirror image of the man who had betrayed her. She wanted the truth to be seen. That was enough. The next morning, she arranged for Noah to stay with Margaret for a few more hours. Before Claire reached the door, Noah ran after her. "Mom?" She turned around. He hugged her quickly. "Do not let them make you think you do not know what you are doing." Claire stood still. Noah had no idea how much those words carried. Maybe he was only repeating something he had heard. But Claire felt something inside her become steady. She bent down and kissed his forehead. "I will remember." Outside, Jonah was waiting by the car. Claire walked toward him with the Harbor 9 file in her hands. Daniel had prepared himself to deal with a woman trying to save her marriage. But Claire was not trying to save it anymore. She was trying to save her father. She was protecting her son. And most importantly, she was taking back the right to decide the story of her own life. Harbor 9 was ahead. This time, Claire was not walking into it as an abandoned wife. She was walking toward it as the only woman capable of reading the trail Daniel believed no one else was still smart enough to understand. The property sat along a branch of the river not far from Charleston, separated from the main road by a line of ancient oak trees and a black iron gate. From the outside, Harbor 9 looked nothing like a place built to hide secrets. A white main house faced the water. A smaller guest house stood behind it. There was a private dock. Glass windows glowed beneath the gray afternoon sky. Everything was too beautiful. Too quiet. Claire hated it. Jonah stopped the car a short distance from the gate. "If anything feels wrong, we leave." Claire looked at the file resting on her lap. On paper, Harbor 9 belonged to a subsidiary of Blue Harbor Holdings. And Blue Harbor Holdings carried the name Claire Bennett. Daniel had used her identity to build this place. Now that same mistake was opening the door for her to walk inside. Claire got out of the car. She did not climb the gate. She did not sneak through the fence. She did not do anything Daniel could later turn into evidence against her. She simply presented documents confirming her legal interest in the property and asked to speak with the person managing the site. 10 minutes later, the gate opened. Jonah watched her walk through, and in that moment he understood why Edward had once said his daughter was most dangerous when she was calm. Claire did not need to break Daniel's system. She only needed to let the system itself acknowledge her. The property manager was a middle-aged woman named Helen. She looked confused when she saw Claire. "Mrs. Bennett?" Claire recognized the hesitation. Helen knew who she was. She just had not expected her to appear. "Is my husband here?" Helen hesitated. "I am not sure I'm allowed to answer that." Claire kept her voice even. "This property is held within a corporate structure that carries my name. I only want to know whether my father is here." At the mention of Edward, something changed in Helen's eyes. Only for a moment. It was enough. Claire looked toward the guest house. "He is in there." Helen did not answer. Claire started walking. No one stopped her. The guest house door was unlocked. Edward was sitting beside the window, a thin blanket draped over his knees, a cup of cold tea resting on the table. He was not injured. There were no restraints. No signs of violence. But his phone was gone, his car was not there, and the exhaustion on his face made it clear that staying had not been entirely his choice. Claire froze. Edward looked up. For 1 second, relief flooded his face. Then came anger. "You should not be here." Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "You disappear, leave files and secret messages behind, and expect me to sit quietly at home?" Edward stood. Claire stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. She had thought she would ask a dozen questions. But the moment she had her father in her arms, every question disappeared. She only held him tighter. Edward placed a hand on his daughter's back. "I'm sorry." Claire closed her eyes. "Do not apologize right now." A voice came from the doorway. For the first time in days, Claire heard Daniel without a phone between them. "I am glad to see you too." Claire released her father. Daniel stood outside the door in a dark coat, his hands empty, his posture so composed it was almost polite. Vanessa was not with him. Daniel looked at Edward first, then at Claire. He had expected her to come, just not this quickly. Claire could see it in his eyes. A calculation had gone wrong. Daniel stepped inside. "I told the people here to take care of your father." Edward gave a dry laugh. "Taking my phone, keeping my car, and telling me I am not allowed to leave the property is not taking care of me." Daniel did not look at him. He looked at Claire. "You need to calm down." Claire was not angry. That unsettled Daniel more. She asked one question. "When did it start?" Daniel understood immediately. "Not just Vanessa. Not just Blue Harbor. When did you start turning our marriage into part of your business plan?" Daniel stared at her for a long time. For a moment he seemed to consider continuing to deny it. Then he stopped. "It was not like that in the beginning." A faint pain moved through Claire's chest. Daniel continued. "In the beginning I loved you. I needed you. I trusted you more than anyone." Edward turned his face away. Claire did not. She wanted to hear all of it. Daniel explained that as the company grew, the financial structures became more complicated. Claire's name gave those structures credibility. Her expertise made the decisions look reasonable. Then Daniel realized Claire was no longer checking. Not anymore. She was busy raising Noah, busy taking care of the family, busy trusting him. He had turned that trust into a resource. Claire asked. "And Vanessa?" Daniel exhaled. "That came later." "How long?" Daniel did not answer. Claire understood. Some silences are answers. She looked at the man standing in front of her. 14 years ago, she had believed Daniel's strength was his ability to make people feel safe. Now she understood. His real strength was making other people doubt themselves before they had time to doubt him. Daniel walked toward the table. He placed a file on it. "I do not want this to get any worse." Claire looked at the cover. "Settlement agreement." Daniel opened it. A house. Enough money for Claire and Noah to live comfortably. Noah's education fully provided for. Shared custody under a fixed schedule. In return, Claire would give up any claim to Blue Harbor, sign a confidentiality agreement, and agree that all previous financial matters would be resolved privately. Daniel pushed a pen toward her. "You can end this today." Edward stepped forward. "Do not sign it." Claire raised one hand. "Dad!" Edward fell silent. Daniel looked at her. He believed he had regained control. Because the number on the page was large. Because Claire was standing beside an exhausted father. Because Noah was waiting for her to come home. Daniel believed a mother would choose stability. He was not wrong about that. He simply misunderstood what stability meant to Claire. She asked, "If I sign this, my father leaves here immediately?" "Yes." "And every allegation connected to me disappears?" Daniel nodded. Claire looked down at the page. Elsewhere, inside the car parked beyond the gate, Jonah was monitoring a lawful backup process arranged by Claire's attorney using documents Claire had the legal right to access. There had been no technical breach. No stolen passwords. Only records Daniel had once placed under Claire's name, now being preserved before anyone could change the story surrounding them. The progress bar moved slowly across the screen. Daniel had no idea. Claire picked up the pen. Edward stared at his daughter as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Daniel, meanwhile, almost seemed to relax. He spoke softly. "This is the right choice." Claire looked up. Her expression softened just enough for Daniel to see the wife he remembered. "Maybe you are right." She lowered the tip of the pen toward the page. Daniel did not know Claire was buying time. He did not know every question she asked was purchasing another few minutes. He did not know Jonah was outside. And he had no idea that while he was trying to convince Claire to surrender the truth itself was slipping piece by piece beyond his control. The phone in Claire's pocket vibrated once. The only signal she and Jonah had agreed on. The backup was complete. Claire stopped the pen just above the signature line. Daniel looked down. "What is it?" Claire closed the file, very slowly. Then she looked directly into her husband's eyes. For the first time in 14 years, Daniel could not predict what she was about to do. And Claire realized that this was the exact moment the balance of power between them changed hands. Daniel was still standing across from her, waiting for a signature. He did not realize that what he was seeing was not hesitation. It was a decision. Claire set the pen down. "I need to read all of it again." Daniel frowned slightly. "You just said this might be the right choice." "It might be." Claire closed the file. "But being right does not mean I have to sign something before I fully understand it." Silence settled over the room. Daniel did not like that answer. For years he had grown accustomed to Claire allowing him to make the final call on major decisions. Which house they should buy, which investments they should keep, which lawyers they should hire, which companies should be placed under whose name. He called it sharing responsibility. Claire now understood that it was how power could be transferred little by little without anyone noticing. Edward stepped beside his daughter. "We are leaving." Daniel looked at him. "Mr. Cole, I think it would be best if you rested a little longer." Edward did not raise his voice. "I do not need you deciding what is best for me." Claire picked up the settlement agreement. She did not take it with her. She placed it back in front of Daniel. "I will respond through my attorney." The final 3 words changed something in Daniel's eyes. "Your attorney?" Claire looked directly at him. "You are not the only one who gets to prepare in advance anymore." Outside the gate, Jonah saw Claire and Edward emerge. He got out of the car immediately. Edward walked slowly but steadily. When he saw Jonah, he gave him a single nod, the kind of greeting exchanged between 2 men who did not need to waste time proving how relieved they were to see each other. Claire opened the car door for her father. Before getting in, Edward turned back toward Harbor 9. There was no fear in his eyes, only disappointment. "I warned him." Claire stopped. "You warned Daniel?" Edward nodded. "I told him that if he wanted a divorce, then he should get one, but he should not turn you and Noah into collateral for the choices he made." Claire looked at her father. "What did Daniel say?" Edward gave a faint, bitter smile. "He said I was old, that I no longer understood how the world worked." Jonah opened the car door. Edward got inside. Claire looked back at the white house beside the river. Daniel had said similar things about her, only in more polite ways. That she had been out of the profession too long. That corporate finance was more complicated now. That she did not need to worry about it. Every sentence had sounded caring. Placed together, they formed a cage. Claire got into the car. Jonah's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, then turned toward her. "The copies have been confirmed." "Complete?" "The records you had the legal right to preserve have been transferred to independent counsel. There is more data than we expected." Claire did not ask how the system had done it. The technical details were not what mattered. What mattered was that from this moment forward, Daniel could no longer alter a set of records and then claim that the new version was the only truth. They left Harbor 9. Less than 10 minutes later, Claire's phone rang. "Daniel?" She looked at his name. She did not answer. He called again, then a 3rd time. Edward looked at his daughter. "You do not have to answer." Claire knew that, but this time she wanted to hear him. She took the call. Daniel was no longer using the gentle voice he had used at Harbor 9. "What did you do?" Claire looked at the road ahead. "I brought my father home." "Do not play with words." "Something has changed in the record system." Claire remained silent. Daniel continued. "Did you copy the documents?" His voice was tighter now. Not loud. But Claire could hear the loss of control just beneath the surface. She said, "I preserved records connected to my name and legal interests through my attorney." Daniel went silent. That answer was much harder to attack than an angry confession. Claire did not threaten him. She did not celebrate. She gave him no easy words he could twist into something else. Daniel spoke slowly. "You do not understand what you are doing." Claire looked at her reflection in the car window. Exhausted. Red eyes. Messy hair. But for the first time in years, she recognized the woman staring back at her. "No, Daniel." Her voice was very calm. "For the first time in a very long time, I know exactly what I am doing." She ended the call. No one in the car spoke for several seconds. Then Edward exhaled. "Your mother would be very proud of you." Claire turned towards the window. The words almost made her cry. But Jonah's phone vibrated before the emotion could rise. He looked at the screen. "There is something here." Claire turned back. Jonah opened one of the reports that had just been preserved. The transactions appeared in chronological order. There was a group of transfers made through 3 different companies. Jonah pointed to the name of the legal approver, Vanessa Sloan. Not surprising. But then Claire noticed another group, a separate trust. The assets were significant. The final beneficiary was hidden beneath a structure different from the rest. Jonah looked at her. "I think Daniel has one network Vanessa knows about, and another one she does not." Claire kept reading. Line by line, date by date, transfer by transfer. Daniel had not only been lying to his wife, it appeared he had also been lying to the woman helping him hide the truth. Claire leaned back against the seat. She had believed Daniel and Vanessa were on the same side. Now she understood that their alliance might have been built on the same thing that had destroyed her marriage. Not love, self-interest. And self-interest does not create loyalty. At Harbor 9, Vanessa walked into the room where Daniel was still standing beside the unsigned settlement agreement. She looked at him. "Claire left?" Daniel did not answer. Vanessa placed her phone on the table. "Someone preserved part of the Blue Harbor records through legal channels. We need to know what they have." Daniel turned around. "We?" Vanessa caught the change in his tone. "Do not start that right now." Daniel walked toward the window. "I told you to control the records." "And I told you not to underestimate Claire." Daniel looked at her. Vanessa held his gaze. For the first time, the fracture between them became visible. Not because of anything Claire had done to either of them, but because the moment power began slipping away, Daniel and Vanessa immediately started looking for someone to blame. On the drive back to Edisto, Claire kept reading the records on Jonah's screen. The more she read, the more clearly she saw the pattern. Daniel divided his secrets into layers. One layer for accounting, one for Vanessa, one for Claire to see, and at the deepest level, one reserved only for himself. The man who had always said marriage had to be built on trust had never truly trusted anyone. Claire closed the laptop. "I was wrong." Jonah looked at her. "About what?" "I thought Vanessa and Daniel built all of this together." Claire looked ahead. "But Daniel has been hiding things from her, too." Edward nodded slowly. "And if Vanessa finds out?" Claire did not answer immediately. She had no intention of using betrayal to provoke anyone into doing something dangerous. She did not need to. The truth was powerful enough on its own. She said, "Then for the first time, Vanessa will have to decide whether she is protecting Daniel or protecting herself." Jonah looked at Claire. "And you?" Claire turned toward him. "I am not protecting Daniel anymore." The sentence was short. But to Claire, it carried more weight than any declaration of war. For years, whenever she noticed something that did not feel right, she had searched for the explanation that hurt the least. Now she stopped doing that. She no longer asked herself why she had not seen it sooner. That question only kept her trapped in the past. The more important question was waiting ahead. Knowing everything she knew now, what would she do next? Claire opened the file again. At the end of a chain of transactions, an address appeared. The Magnolia House, Charleston. Beside it was an appointment scheduled for the following day. Daniel's name, Vanessa's name, and a representative from an investment fund that had never appeared in any of the previous records. Claire stared at the line. Jonah saw it too. "Looks like they are about to finalize a transaction." Claire closed the screen. "No." Her voice became firm. "It looks like they think they are about to finalize a transaction." For the first time since all of this began, Daniel was no longer the only person who knew the next move. And what he still did not understand was that Claire did not need to destroy his plan. She only needed to make sure the right people saw it. Claire understood that even more clearly when they returned to Edisto Island late that afternoon. Daniel had built his entire system around controlling information. He decided who was allowed to know which part, who could see which number, who was supposed to believe which version of the story. For years, his power had never truly come from money. It came from always being the one who told the story first. Tomorrow, Claire was going to take that power away from him. Edward fell asleep almost as soon as they returned to the cottage. His body was more exhausted than he was willing to admit. Jonah sat in the dining room, continuing to review the records that had been preserved. Claire stood outside on the porch, watching the water darken, her phone pressed to her ear. Her independent attorney had just confirmed something. The meeting at Magnolia House was not an ordinary appointment. It was the final step in transferring a group of Blue Harbor assets into a new trust. If the transfer was completed, determining ownership would become far more complicated. Claire asked. Vanessa prepared the documents? Yes. The answer did not surprise her. What came next did. Most of Blue Harbor's legal structure had been designed by Vanessa's firm years earlier. Claire went silent. Not Daniel. Vanessa. Daniel may have been the one setting the objectives, but Vanessa was the one who turned those objectives into paperwork. Claire looked through the glass doors into the living room. Edward was asleep on the sofa. Noah sat a few feet away at a small table doing homework, looking up every few minutes to make sure his grandfather was still there. A cold feeling moved through Claire. Vanessa had walked into her home, eaten dinner with her family, brought gifts for Noah, sat beside Claire during some of the darkest days of her life, and all the while, page after page prepared inside Vanessa's office had been quietly building a future in which Claire could lose money, lose her reputation, and even be forced to fight to prove that she was a trustworthy mother. Claire ended the call. Jonah stepped onto the porch. Are you okay? Claire looked at him. I am starting to hate that question. Jonah nodded. Fair enough. He handed her a file. There is something you need to see. Claire opened it. Inside were draft exchanges between Vanessa and Daniel about the asset structure. Vanessa had not simply helped hide the assets. She had been the architect. Every intermediary company, every trust, every layer of transferred ownership, every method that placed Claire just visibly enough on the paperwork to carry responsibility, but never enough to have real control. Claire read in silence. The more she read, the more something disturbing became clear. Vanessa understood the system deeply, but not as deeply as Daniel, because the assets Daniel had hidden from Vanessa did not appear in any of her plans. Daniel had built a secret room inside the secret house Vanessa had designed for him. Jonah sat across from Claire. If Vanessa finds out, she is going to realize Daniel never saw her as a true partner either. Claire closed the file. I do not care what they think about each other. Jonah looked at her. You do not? No, Claire answered firmly. I spent too many years trying to guess what Daniel was thinking. I am not going to replace Daniel with Vanessa and keep living my life around someone else's thoughts. Jonah gave a small smile. That sounds very different from the Claire of a week ago. Claire looked out at the water. A week ago, I still thought saving my marriage meant saving my family. She paused. Now I know that sometimes holding on to something broken only keeps hurting everyone trapped inside it. Neither of them said anything else. From inside the house, Noah called. Mom. Claire stepped inside. He was standing by the table with a worksheet in his hand, but he was not looking at it. Grandpa is asleep. I know. Noah looked at Claire. Does Dad know Grandpa is back? Yes. He went quiet. Then he asked the question Claire knew would come sooner or later. If you and Dad get divorced, are we still a family? Claire felt the question hurt in a completely different way from every document on the table. She sat down so they were at eye level. Yes, but it will be different. Different how? Claire thought for a few seconds. You might have 2 places to stay. Some days you will be with me, and on other days you may see your dad. There may be days when everything feels difficult and messy. Noah looked down. So is our family broken? Claire gently placed her hands over his. No. A marriage can end, but a family is not just one house with 3 people living inside it. She looked toward Edward sleeping on the sofa. Family is the people who make you feel loved, respected, and safe when you are with them. Noah thought about that very seriously. So Grandpa is family. Absolutely. Margaret is kind of family too. Claire laughed. I think she would be very happy to hear that. Noah smiled for the first time that day. Then he asked, Do you have to marry someone else? Claire froze. No. Why? Because starting over does not always mean finding someone else. Claire brushed his hair back. Sometimes a second chance just means getting the chance to live a better life with yourself. Noah did not fully understand, but he nodded. Children do not need to understand everything immediately. Sometimes they only need to know that the adult beside them is telling the truth. That evening, Jonah received the detailed schedule for the meeting at Magnolia House. Claire looked at the address, and an old memory pulled itself forward. Magnolia House? 14 years ago, it had not been the setting for a financial deal. It had been the place where Daniel and Claire held their wedding reception. She remembered the lights hanging over the courtyard. The white dress. Edward raising his glass. Daniel placing a hand against her back and whispering that he would never let her have to worry about anything. She had thought it was a promise. Now she understood it had sounded almost more like a warning. He would handle everything. All she had to do was trust him. Jonah looked at Claire. Are you sure you want to go? Yes. You do not have to confront him directly. Your attorney can handle it. I know. Then why do you want to be there? Claire looked at the words Magnolia House on the screen. Because Daniel spent years deciding which version of me was allowed to exist inside his story. The wife. The stay-at-home mother. The financially dependent woman. The woman who signed papers without understanding them. She looked up. Tomorrow I want to show up as myself. The next morning, Claire put on a dark blue suit that had been sitting for years inside a garment bag she had left at Edward's house from the days when she still worked. It still fit. When she looked into the mirror, she almost did not recognize herself. Not because of the clothes, because of the posture. Shoulders straight. Eyes clear. No longer trying to predict how Daniel might react. Edward stood in the doorway. You look like your mother when she was about to walk into an argument she already knew she was going to win. Claire smiled. Did Mom usually win? Edward shrugged. I was smart enough to remember that she did. Noah ran over and hugged Claire. You will be home for dinner, right? Claire hugged him back. I will do my best. Noah looked up at her. Do not let Dad make you think you do not know what you are doing. Claire looked at her son. It was the second time Noah had said those words. This time they did not hurt. They gave her strength. Claire stepped outside toward the car. Magnolia House was waiting. The place where Daniel had once stood in front of everyone and called Claire the woman he trusted more than anyone in the world. Today, he would have to watch that same woman walk into the room where he planned to complete the biggest secret of his life. Only one thing had changed. This time, Claire was not coming to trust Daniel. She was coming to make everyone else see the truth about him. Magnolia House appeared at the end of the street, its tall windows reflecting the silver-gray Charleston sky. 14 years earlier, Claire had walked through those doors in a wedding dress, her arm linked with Edward's, surrounded by laughter and congratulations. That day, Daniel had stood at the far end of the room, looking at her as though nothing else in the world could possibly matter more. Today, he was standing in that same room. But this time, he was waiting for a signature worth millions of dollars. Claire walked in with her attorney. Jonah followed behind. Edward stood to her left, his back straight despite the exhaustion still visible on his face. No one spoke for the first few seconds. Daniel looked at Claire. His eyes stopped on the dark blue suit. He recognized it. Claire had worn something very similar during the years when she worked in forensic accounting, a memory Daniel had not thought about in a very long time. Vanessa stood beside the long conference table. Neatly arranged files lay in front of her. 2 representatives from the investment fund sat across from her with their legal counsel. None of them had expected to see Claire. Vanessa reacted first. Claire, this is a private meeting. Claire looked at her. It concerns a trust containing assets that originated from Blue Harbor Holdings. She placed a file on the table. And Blue Harbor Holdings is in my name. The atmosphere shifted. One of the fund representatives looked at Vanessa. Vanessa immediately regained her composure. The ownership issues are being handled through a private marital proceeding. There is nothing here that should interrupt this transaction. Claire did not argue. She did not need to. Her attorney stepped forward and explained that certain documents concerning ownership, source of funds, and authorization were under review. The appropriate parties had been notified to prevent the transaction from being completed before those questions were resolved. Daniel looked at Claire. He understood. Not everything, but enough. You are trying to destroy the company. The accusation felt familiar to Claire. Daniel was doing what he had always done, turning his own actions into a story in which someone else became the problem. She answered, No, I am stopping you from transferring assets whose ownership has not yet been properly established. Daniel stood. Claire, you are reacting like an angry wife. Jonah glanced toward her. He knew those words would hurt. Edward knew too. Daniel knew best of all. Because that was exactly the point. If Claire became angry, he would get his old story back. The betrayed wife. The woman who had lost control. Claire looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then she gave the faintest smile. You still think this is a story about an angry wife? The room went silent. Claire stepped toward the table. That is why you do not understand what is happening. She opened the file. This is the story of a forensic accountant who finally decided to audit the books of her own marriage. The smile disappeared from Daniel's face. Claire did not raise her voice. She laid out each point. Assets transferred between legal entities. Signatures carrying her name on dates when she could not possibly have authorized them. Documents that placed responsibility on her without giving her control. Divorce strategies that used those same transactions to raise questions about her financial judgment. No dramatic language was necessary. No explosive accusations. Only dates, documents, connections. The very things Daniel had always believed no one would have enough patience to place side by side. Vanessa understood before he did. She looked down at a record Claire's attorney had just placed on the table. Then she looked at Daniel. What is this trust? Daniel did not answer. Vanessa pulled the document closer. Claire watched. It was the same network Jonah had discovered the day before. A portion of the assets Daniel had hidden not only from Claire, but from Vanessa as well. Vanessa began reading faster. The color in her face changed. Daniel, you told me all assets outside the primary structure had been disclosed to me. Daniel kept his voice low. Not now. Not now? Vanessa looked at him. I designed the legal structure for you based on the information you gave me. Daniel leaned slightly toward her. And you were paid to do that. One sentence. Short? Cold. But Claire saw what it shattered. For years, Vanessa may have believed she stood beside Daniel as an equal. A partner. An advisor. The woman he would eventually choose once the marriage was over. Now she realized Daniel had kept her in the same position where he had once kept Claire. Close enough to be useful. Never close enough to know everything. Claire felt no satisfaction. There was no victory in watching two people betray each other. Only a sad truth. Relationships built on secrets rarely contain trust. One of the fund representatives closed the file in front of him. We are going to pause the signing until our legal department completes its review. Daniel turned toward him. That is unnecessary. I think it is necessary. The man stood. His counsel began gathering the documents as well. Daniel looked around the room. He was losing the thing he valued most. Not money. Control. Vanessa's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. A notification from her office. Then Daniel's phone vibrated. Then his attorney's. The relevant records had been sent to parties with a lawful need to review them, including corporate counsel, the financial institutions involved, and the appropriate authorities reviewing the irregularities. No one in the room needed Claire to explain any further. Daniel looked at her. You sent everything? Claire answered. I preserved the truth. He took one step toward her, then stopped. No threat. No violence. Just a man trying to find the words that had once made his wife doubt herself. You have no idea what this is going to cause. Claire looked at him. I do. The company could be affected. I know. Noah is going to hear things about his father. Pain passed briefly through Claire's eyes. I know. Daniel lowered his voice. Then why are you still doing this? Claire looked at the man she had once loved. Because the consequences of the truth are not the fault of the person who reveals it. For the first time, Daniel had no immediate answer. Vanessa closed her laptop. She turned toward her own attorney. From this point forward, I will need independent counsel. Daniel looked at her. Vanessa did not look back. Their alliance ended faster than Claire had ever imagined. Not because love had disappeared, but because perhaps from the beginning, whatever had tied them together had never truly been close enough to love. The meeting ended without a single signature. As everyone began to leave, Daniel called Claire back. He stood beneath the chandelier where, 14 years earlier, they had taken their wedding photographs. There is something you need to know. Claire stopped. Daniel looked at her. Not all of our marriage was fake. The words struck a place Claire thought she had already locked away. Because the most painful possibility was not that Daniel had never loved her. It was that he once had. There had been real mornings, real laughter, The day Noah was born. The nights they sat together in the kitchen talking about the future. And then, somewhere along the way, Daniel had decided that love mattered less than control. Claire removed her wedding ring. She did not throw it. She did not slam it onto the table. She did not turn the moment into an act of revenge. She simply placed the ring in front of Daniel. That does not save the parts you chose to destroy. Claire turned away. Edward was waiting near the door. Jonah stood behind him. Neither of them pulled her away. Claire walked on her own. When the doors of Magnolia House opened, the cold afternoon light poured inside. 14 years earlier, Claire had left this place carrying Daniel's name, believing she had just begun a new life. Today, she walked out without needing his name to know who she was. Daniel remained behind. For the first time, he no longer had the right to tell her story for her, and Claire understood that this was what she had truly taken back. 8 months later, Claire stood in front of a small house on the outskirts of Charleston with a new key in her hand. It was not a mansion. There was no iron gate, no living room designed to impress investors. Just a wooden porch, a yard large enough for Noah to kick a soccer ball around, and a young maple tree beginning to change color as autumn arrived. Claire slid the key into the lock. Noah stood behind her, holding a cardboard box with books and toys written across it in black marker. Edward stood beside the car, pretending to be busy checking whether the remaining boxes were stacked evenly. Jonah leaned against the other side of the car, holding 2 cups of coffee and making no attempt to pretend he was doing anything useful. Claire opened the door. The empty house echoed with the footsteps of 3 generations walking inside together. Noah ran straight to the back window. "Mom, I can see the tree from my room." Claire smiled. "I know. Can I hang a swing from it?" "Ask Grandpa." Noah immediately turned toward Edward. "Grandpa." Edward raised one hand. "I have not even made it all the way through the door yet." Noah laughed. The sound filled the empty house faster than any piece of furniture ever could. Claire stopped in the middle of the living room. 8 months. Only 8 months since the birthday night when her cards had been blocked, the old house had been closed to her, and Daniel had believed he had left his wife with almost nothing. Everything that followed had moved much more slowly than stories about justice usually made it seem. There was no single morning when everything was suddenly resolved. No one moment when Claire woke up and all the pain was gone. There were lawyers. There were reviews. There were long meetings. There were days when Claire had to read documents again and again, each page reminding her that someone she had once trusted had turned that trust into a tool. But the truth held. The preserved records established that many of the signatures carrying Claire's name had not been made by her. Previously obscured transactions were brought under review. Blue Harbor and the related structures were examined closely. During the restructuring process, Daniel lost control over much of the company's operations and faced legal proceedings connected to the financial records and documents carrying Claire's name. Vanessa had to protect herself as well. When she discovered that Daniel had hidden another network of assets from her too, their relationship collapsed almost immediately. Claire was not happy when she heard. She was not sad either. By then, Daniel and Vanessa had stopped being the center of her life. That was the greatest change of all. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday morning. Daniel and Claire sat on opposite sides of a room. There was no shouting, no dramatic final speech, only documents signed under the supervision of attorneys, and a 14-year marriage becoming part of the past through a handful of small strokes of ink. When Claire walked outside, Daniel called her name. She stopped. He stood beneath the awning, looking older than he had 8 months earlier. Not because of his hair, not because of his face, because he no longer carried the absolute certainty of a man who believed he always knew what everyone else would do. He asked, "Do you ever think things could have been different?" Claire understood their question. If he had not hidden the assets, if there had been no Vanessa, if he had not used her name, if he had not prepared to make her carry the blame, if he had simply told her that he no longer wanted the marriage, maybe. But Claire no longer lived inside versions of the past that had never happened. She said, "The only thing I wish had been different is that you had given me the truth sooner." Daniel lowered his eyes. Claire turned away. She did not need his apology to move forward. 1 month later, she went back to work. Not for a large corporation. Not inside the glass offices where she had started her career. Claire opened a small consulting practice. At first, there was only a desk, a laptop, and Jonah regularly appearing with coffee no one had asked him to bring. Claire's work was simple. She helped people going through major changes in their marriages understand what actually existed in their financial lives. Not to teach them to distrust everyone, but so they would never have to surrender the right to understand their own lives simply because they loved someone. Her first client was a woman who had been married for nearly 20 years and had never once looked at the family investment accounts. Claire did not tell her to get divorced. She did not tell her that her husband must be hiding something. Claire simply said, "Knowing the truth about your own finances is not a lack of trust. It is a responsibility to your own life." As she said the words, Claire realized she was also speaking to an older version of herself. Edward moved into an apartment less than 10 minutes from Claire's house. He insisted it was only temporary. Claire never asked how long temporary was supposed to mean. Noah, meanwhile, declared that Grandpa needed to live close enough to come over for dinner without making an appointment. Edward did not argue. Jonah returned to his independent financial investigation work. He and Claire continued working together on several cases. There was no rushed romance between them. Claire did not need another man to prove that she had healed. Her second chance was not another marriage. It was the chance to become the woman she had forgotten inside her first one. One afternoon in early winter, Claire sat at the dining table in the new house. Noah was doing homework across from her. Edward was outside on the porch trying to repair an old radio, even though no one could remember asking him to fix it. An envelope rested on the table. Claire had just opened it. Inside was the final confirmation related to ownership of the house. Noah looked at the papers. "Is this house really yours, Mom?" Claire looked at him. "Ours." Noah thought for a moment. "No one can take it away?" The question made Claire go quiet. 8 months earlier, she might have answered with money, with contracts, with ownership rights. Now she understood that Noah was not really asking about the house. He was asking about safety. Claire set the paper down. Not this time. Noah studied his mother's face the way he had ever since that birthday, checking to see whether there was something behind her words she was trying to hide. Then his shoulders relaxed. "Good!" He looked back down at his homework. Outside on the porch, Edward's radio suddenly crackled to life. He cheered as though he had repaired something far more important than it actually was. Noah laughed. Claire laughed too. An ordinary sound. But after months of chaos, ordinary had become incredibly precious. Claire looked around the room. She had once believed she needed to get the money back. Then she thought she needed to restore her reputation. After that, she thought she needed Daniel to understand how badly he had underestimated her. In the end, she realized the most important thing was none of those things. She had regained the ability to trust her own judgment. Love does not require someone to stop asking questions. Marriage does not give anyone the right to control the truth. And boundaries are not a sign of a lack of love. Sometimes they are exactly how a person protects the respect they still have for themselves. Claire was no longer the woman standing outside her old house wondering what she had done wrong. She was the woman who understood that being betrayed did not define her worth. What defined her was how she chose to stand up afterward. If Claire's story made you think, ask yourself one question. If you discovered that your partner had hidden major financial secrets and was preparing another life behind your back, would you leave the moment you learned the first truth, or would you stay long enough to understand everything that was really happening? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy stories about marriage, betrayal, hidden truths, and the journey of a woman finding herself again, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can continue with us into the stories ahead. Because sometimes a second chance is not about getting your old life back. Sometimes it is about finally being brave enough to build a new one.